The fist caught me square in the jaw, and I tasted iron before I hit the floor. My back slammed against the training mat so hard the impact rattled my teeth. Above me, Korvath stood 8 feet tall, his reptilian scales shimmering under the gymnasium lights, his slit pupil eyes staring down at me with something that was not quite anger, and not quite pity. It was worse than both. It was boredom. "Stay down, human," he said, and the dozen cadets watching from the edge of the ring made sounds that I had learned to recognize as laughter, even though none of them laughed the way humans do. I got up. I always got up. That was the only thing I knew how to do at Thalorn Military Academy that none of them respected. My name is Marin Voss. I was 22 years old, I was 5'7", I weighed 130 pounds, and I was the only human being in the combat track of the most prestigious military academy in the Galactic Confederacy. There were 8 other humans at the academy. They were all in safer divisions: logistics, communications, medical support, tracks where being small and breakable did not get you thrown across a room 3 times a week. I had chosen the combat track because I was either brave or stupid, and after 2 years at Thalorn, I still had not figured out which one it was. Korvath came at me again. He was a Draelith, a species that evolved on a high-gravity death world where everything either had claws or learned to run very fast. The Draelith did not run. They were the apex of their food chain, and they carried that confidence into everything they did. Korvath was my squad leader, and he had made it clear from my first day that he considered my presence in his unit a personal insult. I ducked under his swing, not because I was faster, because I was not, but because I had been watching the way his shoulder dropped a fraction of a second before every right hook for the past 7 months. He did not know I had noticed. None of them ever thought I was paying that kind of attention. My counterstrike landed against his ribs. It did nothing. Hitting a Draelith was like punching a wall made of warm stone, but I saw his eyes flicker, just for a moment, because he had not expected me to dodge. That was enough. He caught me on the next exchange, a sweeping backhand that sent me stumbling into the ropes, and the instructor called the match. Another loss for Cadet Voss, another tally mark in a long, long column of defeats. I wiped the blood from my lip and walked back to the bench. Nobody offered me water. Nobody nodded in acknowledgement. I sat down alone and pressed a cold pack against my jaw, while the next pair of cadets entered the ring. 2 Oravani who moved like dancers and struck with telekinetic precision that made the air shimmer. The Oravani were beautiful in the way that everything about them was beautiful. Tall, slender, with skin that shifted between shades of pale silver and deep violet depending on their mood. They could move small objects with their minds, and their marksmanship records were untouchable. Every Oravani at Thalorn shot with a precision that bordered on unfair. Then there were the Vaelshi, insectoid, brilliant. They thought in clusters, their minds networked together through a biological signal that let them process tactical scenarios faster than any computer I had ever seen. A single Vaelshi was smart. A group of them was terrifying. And then there was me, a human, from a planet that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 11 years ago. A species so new to the galactic stage that most of the Confederacy's member worlds had not even updated their star charts to include Earth. We were a footnote, a curiosity, a charity case that the Confederacy had admitted as a diplomatic gesture, the way you might let a child sit at the adults' table during a formal dinner. I made my way back to my quarters after the training session, walking through corridors that curved gently upward in both directions because Thalorn was a station, a massive ring orbiting the Confederacy capital world of Aethys Prime. 60,000 cadets from 37 species trained here. I knew the names of maybe 200 of them. Fewer than 10 knew mine. My quarters were small, a bunk, a desk, a viewport that looked out into the black. I had decorated the walls with exactly nothing, because every time I tried, something about it felt like I was pretending this was home. It was not home. Home was a blue planet circling a yellow star somewhere in the outer arm of the galaxy, so far from Aethys Prime that the light from my sun would take thousands of years to reach here. I peeled off my training suit and stepped into the narrow shower. The water was recycled, slightly metallic, and exactly 3 degrees colder than I would have liked. I stood under it and let it wash the sweat and the failure off me, while I did what I always did after a bad day. I planned for tomorrow. That was the thing nobody at this academy understood about me. Every bruise was data, every loss was a lesson. When Korvath threw me, I studied the arc. When the Oravani cadets outshot me on the range, I memorized their breathing patterns. When the Vaelshi ran tactical simulations and finished in half the time it took me, I watched the way they divided problems and taught myself to think in parallel. I was not stronger. I was not faster. I was not smarter. But I was paying attention in a way that none of them were, because none of them had to. They had all grown up knowing exactly what they were built for. I had grown up knowing that I was not built for any of this, and that meant I had to learn all of it. Dinner was a solitary affair. The mess hall was enormous, a vaulted space designed to accommodate species that ranged from 3 feet to 12 feet tall. The food dispensers offered nutritional options calibrated to over 40 different biologies, and the human menu had improved significantly since my first year, when everything had tasted vaguely like cardboard mixed with regret. I sat at my usual table, a small one near the viewport, and ate something that the dispenser called a protein blend, but that I had learned to think of as close enough to pasta if I did not look at it too carefully. Across the hall I could see the other human cadets sitting together. Lucy Grant caught my eye and gave me a small wave. She was in the medical track, and she was good at it. The aliens liked her because she was gentle and careful, and did not try to compete with them physically. I waved back but did not go over. I had separated myself from the other humans early on, not because I did not like them, but because I needed the alien cadets to see me as a combat track soldier, not as a human who happened to be in the wrong classroom. If I spent all my time with my own kind, I would always be the human. If I stood alone, there was at least a chance I could become something else. It had not worked yet, but I was not done trying. After dinner, I went to the tactical simulation lab. It was mostly empty at this hour, just a few Vaelshi cadets running network drills in one corner, and an Oravani practicing long-range targeting scenarios. I booked a solo terminal and loaded up the exercise from that morning, the one where my squad had been tasked with assaulting a fortified bunker. I had seen a flanking route during the exercise, a narrow approach through a drainage system that would have put us behind the bunker's defenses entirely. I had flagged it on the squad channel, and Korvath had dismissed it, without even looking at my sensor data. We had taken the conventional approach, a frontal assault with suppressive fire, and we had scored a 62 out of 100. Now, alone in the sim lab, I ran the flanking route. It worked. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but it worked. The simulation scored it at 89. I stared at the number for a long time. Nobody would ever see it. Nobody would ever know. But I knew, and that was enough. I saved the simulation data to my personal files, powered down the terminal, and headed back to my quarters. The corridors were quiet now. The station's lighting dimmed to simulate nighttime for the species that slept on a day cycle. I walked slowly, letting myself feel the exhaustion that I kept locked away during the day. My ribs ached. My jaw throbbed. My hands were stiff from gripping practice weapons designed for fingers twice the size of mine. One more day, I told myself, the same thing I had told myself every night for 2 years. Just get through one more day. I was halfway to my quarters when the alarms went off. Not training alarms, not the gentle chimes that signaled a shift change or a drill notification. These were proximity alarms, the ones that meant something had entered the station's restricted perimeter without authorization. I had heard them tested exactly once during a safety orientation. They were louder than I remembered. Cadets began spilling into the corridors, confused, half-dressed, speaking in a dozen languages that my translation implant scrambled to process. I pressed myself against the wall and let the flow carry me toward the nearest viewport. Then I saw it. A ship, sitting in space less than 2 kilometers from the station, well inside the defensive envelope that should have been impossible to breach without being detected and intercepted long before arrival. It was not a Confederacy vessel. I knew the silhouettes of every major ship class in the Confederate fleet, because studying them had been part of my first-year curriculum. This did not match any of them. It was angular where Confederate ships were curved, dark where they were bright. It had no running lights, no visible engine glow, no transponder signal broadcasting its identity and intentions. It sat in the black like a hole cut into the stars. And I recognized it, not the specific ship, but the design language, the sharp lines, the aggressive geometry, the refusal to be anything other than exactly what it was. It was human. Around me, cadets were pressing against viewports, murmuring in confusion and concern. A squad of Drelith security officers jogged past, their boots heavy on the deck plates. The station's internal comm system crackled with terse orders and counter-orders. I stood at the viewport and stared at that dark shape, and felt something I had not felt in a very long time at Thalorn Academy. I felt my heart start to race, not with fear, but with something closer to recognition. Like a signal I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. The ship just sat there, silent and still, and the entire station held its breath. I did not sleep that night. Nobody did. The station buzzed with rumors that multiplied faster than anyone could track them. A pirate vessel, a rogue military test, an alien species from beyond the Confederacy's borders making first contact. Every theory was wrong, and somehow each one felt more plausible than the truth, which was that nobody in the Academy's command structure seemed to know what was happening either. By the time the artificial dawn cycle began, and the corridor lights brightened to full intensity, I had learned exactly 2 facts from the official channels. First, the vessel had transmitted a diplomatic clearance code to the station's command center, a code that carried an authorization level higher than the Academy Commandant's own rank. Second, the vessel had been granted docking permission in Bay 7, which had been sealed off and surrounded by enough security to repel a small invasion. I should have gone to my morning classes. I should have fallen in line with every other cadet and followed the routine that had governed my life for 2 years. Instead, I went to the maintenance crawlway above Bay 7. I had discovered it during my 3rd month at Thalorn, during one of many nights when I could not sleep, and decided to explore the station's less trafficked corridors. Thalorn was old. It had been built and rebuilt and expanded over centuries, and the layers of construction had created gaps and crawlways that were not on any current schematic. The one above Bay 7 was barely wide enough for a human, which meant it was far too narrow for a Drelith, and awkward for most other species. I had used it exactly once before, to watch a Confederate warship dock during a fleet review. Now I pressed my face against the ventilation grate and looked down into the hangar below. The dropship sat on the deck like a predator at rest. Up close, it was even more striking than it had been from the viewport. Its hull was coated in something that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There were no markings anywhere that I could see, no nation's flag, no military branch insignia, no name painted on the bow. Just a hull number stenciled in a font I did not recognize, small and precise and completely unfamiliar. The docking ramp lowered, and 6 people walked out. They were human, all of them, and they were nothing like any human I had ever seen in a Confederate context. The diplomats and politicians who represented Earth on galactic broadcasts were soft people, smiling people, people who wore carefully chosen clothes and spoke in carefully chosen words designed to make humanity seem harmless and grateful and eager to learn. These 6 were none of those things. They moved with a fluidity that I had only ever seen in the most seasoned Drelith warriors, but without the Drelith's heaviness. Every step was deliberate. Every head turn was calibrated. They wore dark tactical gear that fit them like a second skin. No rank insignia, no name patches, no identifying marks of any kind. They carried weapons on their hips, sidearms of a design I had never seen before, sleek and compact and finished in the same light-eating matte black as their ship. The dockworkers in the bay, a mixed crew of Drelith and Oravani, stepped back as the team walked past. I watched a Drelith security officer, a full 7.5 feet of scaled muscle and teeth, stiffen visibly as the lead human approached. The leader was a woman, late 30s or early 40s, with short-cropped silver hair and a face that gave away absolutely nothing. She walked like someone who had never once in her life worried about whether she belonged in a room. When she reached the Academy Commandant, a Veil-She Grand Tactician, who had served for over a century and commanded 60,000 cadets, she did not salute. She did not bow. She did not perform any of the elaborate greeting rituals that Confederate protocol demanded. She spoke. I was too far above to hear the words, but I could read the body language. The Commandant, all 4 of their compound eyes fixed on this silver-haired woman, shifted their posture in a way that I had learned to interpret during 2 years of studying Veil-She behavior. It was deference, subtle, controlled, but unmistakable. The Academy Commandant, one of the most powerful military educators in the Confederacy, was deferring to this woman. I stayed in the crawlway for another hour, watching the team move through the bay with quiet efficiency. They unloaded equipment cases from the dropship, long and heavy, and sealed with biometric locks. They spoke to each other rarely, and when they did, it was in short phrases that my translation implant could not pick up. Then I went back to my quarters because my knees were aching from the cramped space, and I needed to think. I did not get the chance. My personal comm pad chimed with a priority alert before I had even sat down. I looked at the screen and felt the blood drain from my face. The message was tagged with a security classification I had never encountered. The Academy's system used a standard 7-tier classification structure, and the highest level I had ever seen on any document was Tier 5. This message was tagged at a level that my comm pad did not even have a name for. It simply displayed a symbol that I did not recognize, a circle bisected by a single vertical line, and beneath it, a message that was so short it felt like a command. Cadet Marin Voss, Bay 7. Immediately. Come alone. I went. The corridors leading to Bay 7 were blocked by security checkpoints that had not existed 12 hours ago. At each one, I held up my comm pad with the message displayed, and at each one, the guards looked at the classification symbol and waved me through without a word. The last checkpoint was manned by 2 of the humans from the dropship. They were the first humans I had seen at Thalorn who looked at me not with the caution of fellow outsiders but with the steady assessment of professionals evaluating a colleague. One of them, a man with close-cropped dark hair and a thin scar running along his jaw, nodded once and stepped aside. Inside the dropship, the air was different, cooler, cleaner. It smelled like ozone and metal, and something faintly chemical that I could not place. The interior was stripped down to pure function, every surface matte gray, every fixture mounted flush against the walls, nothing decorative, nothing wasted. The silver-haired woman was waiting for me in a small compartment near the bow. She sat behind a folding desk that had nothing on it except a thin display tablet and a cup of something that steamed gently. She looked at me the way a surgeon looks at a scan, not with emotion, but with absolute attention to detail. "Sit," she said. I sat. "My name is Eleanor Calloway," she said. "I am not going to tell you my rank because it does not exist in any structure you would recognize. I am not going to tell you which branch of Earth's government I work for, because the answer would not mean anything to you yet. What I am going to do is ask you a question, and I need you to answer it honestly." I nodded. My mouth was dry. "Do you know why you were really sent to Thalorn?" "I volunteered," I said. "The exchange program was open to all qualified candidates. I applied. I was accepted." She smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had expected exactly that answer and found it mildly amusing. "No, cadet," she said. "You were selected 12 years ago, before you ever knew this academy existed." She tapped the display tablet, and a file opened on the surface between us. I leaned forward and recognized my own face staring back at me, but younger, much younger, a school photograph from when I was 10 years old. Beneath it was data, pages and pages of data, my complete genetic profile, mapped down to the nucleotide level. Cognitive mapping results from standardized tests I barely remembered taking, stress response analytics, adaptability indices, decision-making pattern analysis. Every metric tagged with dates stretching back over a decade, annotated with notes in a clinical shorthand I could not decipher. "This is not your Academy file," Calloway said. "The Academy does not know this file exists. The Confederacy does not know this file exists. This is a threshold file." "Threshold," I repeated. The word meant nothing to me. "When Earth first made contact with the Confederacy," Calloway said, leaning back in her chair, "it was not the public event that the history books describe. The real first contact happened 6 years before the official one, in a classified facility beneath the North Atlantic. A Confederate survey vessel detected our early faster-than-light experiments and sent a diplomatic probe. We intercepted it. We decoded its language, and we began a covert dialogue with select members of the Confederacy's intelligence community." She paused, watching my face. "During those 6 years," she continued, "we learned everything we could about galactic civilization, their species, their histories, their military doctrines, their strengths, their weaknesses, and we discovered something that no alien species had ever thought to quantify, because none of them had ever needed to." She leaned forward. "Humans are generalists, Marin. In a galaxy of specialists, we are the only known species that can fight, think, adapt, endure, empathize, and improvise all at once, in real time, under extreme pressure. The Dralith are stronger. The Vaelshi are smarter in groups. The Oravani are more precise. But none of them can do what you do. What do I do? I asked. Everything, she said. Badly, by their standards. But everything, all at once. And that is something this galaxy has never seen before. She told me about Threshold. It was a program, initiated during the covert contact years, designed to identify humans with the highest expression of this generalist capability. Children who scored across every metric, not at the top of any one, but consistently high across all of them. Children who adapted to new situations faster than their peers, who switched between problem-solving modes without hesitation, who refused to be pinned to a single approach. I had been identified when I was 10. My entire path since then, the schools I had attended, the programs I had been funneled into, the exchange opportunity that I thought I had found on my own, had been quietly shaped by Threshold's architects. You were not sent to Thalorn as a goodwill gesture, Calloway said. You were sent here as a field test. 2 years in the most demanding military training environment in the galaxy, surrounded by species that outperform you in every individual category. We wanted to see what you would do. And what did I do? I asked. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking under the table. You adapted, she said. You learned to read Dralith body language well enough to predict their strikes. You taught yourself parallel processing techniques by observing Vaelshi tactical networks. You studied Oravani shooting patterns and compensated for your lack of telekinetic ability by developing an anticipatory targeting method that none of our analysts had ever seen before. You did all of this without any guidance, without any support, and without ever once giving up. She paused again. You passed, Marin. The silence in that small compartment was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, and beneath it, the faint hum of the dropship systems. Something is coming, Calloway said. Something the Confederacy is not prepared for. Humanity needs people who can operate in alien environments, lead alien allies, think across every doctrinal framework simultaneously, and still make decisions like a human. That is what Threshold builds. That is what you are. She stood and extended her hand across the table. It was such a human gesture, so out of place on this alien station, that it almost made me laugh. Are you willing to find out what you are really capable of? She asked. I looked at her hand. I thought about 2 years of bruises and dismissals and empty tables in the mess hall. I thought about the flanking route that scored 89, and the squad leader who never let me try it. I thought about every night I had stood at my viewport and told myself one more day. I reached out and took her hand. Yes, I said. 12 hours later, I was aboard the dropship and watching Thalorn Academy shrink to a point of light behind us. Calloway had moved fast. My academy records now showed that I had been pulled for a supplementary training program, a polite way of saying I had been deemed inadequate and was being sent for remedial work. It was exactly the kind of thing that would surprise no one. The runt of the combat track, finally washed out. My squad leader Corvath would probably celebrate. The dropship's crew consisted of the 6 operatives I had seen in the docking bay. None of them introduced themselves by full name. The man with the jaw scar was Daniel. The pilot was a woman named Kate, who moved through the cockpit with the kind of quiet confidence that made everything she did look effortless. The others went by Owen, Sophie, Peter, and Nathan, first names only. No ranks, no small talk. I sat in the cargo bay and watched them work during the transit. The journey would take 19 hours, Calloway had told me, through a series of FTL jumps that followed no standard Confederate navigation route. We were going somewhere that was not on any map. What struck me most about the team was not any single thing they did, it was the way they did everything. Daniel spent part of the transit recalibrating a sensor array, then shifted without pause to reviewing tactical briefings on a handheld display, then moved to the cargo bay where he performed a maintenance check on every weapon in the armory. Kate piloted through 2 FTL transitions, then left the cockpit to join Sophie in a hand-to-hand sparring session that was so controlled and fluid it looked choreographed. Every one of them could do every job on the ship, not at the specialist level that a Vaelshi communications officer or a Dralith weapons chief would bring, but at a level of competence that meant any one of them could lose any 3 of the others and still complete a mission. I understood, watching them, that this was what Calloway had been talking about. This was what generalist capability looked like when it was trained and honed and pointed at a purpose. "You are staring," Daniel said, dropping onto the bench across from me. "Sorry." "Do not be." I stared too. When I first came aboard, he leaned back against the bulkhead. "You are wondering how we do it." "Yes." "The same way you do it," he said. "We pay attention to everything. The difference is that someone finally taught us that was not a weakness." We dropped out of FTL for the last time, and I pressed my face against the cargo bay's small viewport. There was nothing outside. No stars, no planets, no stations. Just the deep black of unclaimed space, far beyond the Confederacy's borders. Then Kate adjusted our approach vector, and I saw it. An asteroid. Massive, maybe 60 kilometers across, tumbling slowly in the void. Unremarkable in every way except one. As we drew closer, a section of its surface split apart, and light poured out from inside. The asteroid was hollow, and inside it was a facility. "Welcome to Cairn," Calloway said from the cockpit doorway. Cairn was everything Thalorn was not. Where the Academy was vast and public and designed to impress, Cairn was compact and hidden, and designed to function. The interior of the asteroid had been carved into a series of interconnected chambers, each one dedicated to a specific purpose: training halls, simulation rooms, an armory that made the academies look like a toy shop, living quarters that were Spartan but private. And everywhere, humans. Maybe 200 of them, all moving with that same quiet efficiency I had seen in Calloway's team. No aliens, no Confederate protocols, no species hierarchy, just people. Calloway gave me a day to settle in before the briefings began. I spent most of it wandering the corridors, trying to absorb the scale of what I was seeing. Earth's public presence in the galaxy was a handful of diplomats and exchange students, a species so new to the Confederacy that most alien worlds could not even pronounce our homeworld's name correctly. But here, hidden inside a rock in the middle of nowhere, humanity had built something that nobody knew about. The briefings started the next morning. Calloway led them personally, in a room with no windows, and a table large enough for 20 people. I was the only newcomer. The rest of the seats were filled by threshold operatives, some of whom had been at Cairn for years. "You have been told that you are here because humanity needs generalists," Calloway began. "That is true, but it is not the whole truth. The whole truth is that the galaxy needs generalists, and humanity is the only species producing them." She activated a holographic display above the table. A timeline appeared, stretching back tens of thousands of years, marked with data points in colors I did not recognize. "The Confederacy is 11,000 years old," Calloway said. "In that time, it has grown from a coalition of 4 species to a union of 37. It has survived internal conflicts, territorial disputes, and 3 major civil wars. It considers itself stable, permanent, unshakable." She highlighted a series of gaps in the timeline, periods where the data simply stopped. "Every 11,000 years, give or take a few centuries, something comes from beyond the galactic rim. The Confederacy's own historical records contain fragments of these events, scattered across dozens of species archives, most of them classified or suppressed. The pattern is unmistakable if you know how to look." She showed me the evidence: sensor records from dead civilizations, archaeological data from worlds that had been spacefaring and then, inexplicably, were not, genetic bottleneck markers in species that should have had stable populations. "The last incursion wiped out 3 spacefaring civilizations entirely," Calloway said. "It knocked the Confederacy's predecessor alliance back to a pre-industrial state. Recovery took 4,000 years, and the Confederacy does not talk about it, because admitting that it happened would mean admitting that it could happen again." "When?" I asked. "Our projections say 18 months, Calloway said. "The Confederacy's own long-range sensor network has been detecting anomalies at the galactic rim for the past 2 years. They have classified the data and dismissed it as subspace interference. And we know better. We know better." The training began the next day, and it was unlike anything I had experienced at Thalorn. At the Academy, I had been trained to fit into a system. Every exercise had a correct answer, a prescribed doctrine, a right way to do things: the Drelith approach, the Vielshi approach, the Oravani approach. Specialization was not just encouraged, it was the foundation of everything. At Cairn, the foundation was the opposite. I trained in close combat, Not to beat a Draelith, but to survive one long enough to change the nature of the fight. I trained in tactical analysis. Not to match a Valshi hive cluster, but to think around one. I trained in marksmanship. Not to outshoot an Oravani, but to create situations where precision alone was not enough. And I trained to lead. This was the part that surprised me most. At Thalorn, leadership was about rank and species seniority. The strongest Draelith led the combat units. The most networked Vaelshi led the tactical divisions. Leadership was an extension of specialization. At Cairn, leadership was about integration. Calloway drilled into me the concept of cross-doctrinal command, the ability to understand how every species in a mixed unit thought, fought, and made decisions, and to weave those different approaches into something greater than the sum of its parts. The Draelith will always want to charge, she said during one session. Let them, but position them where their charge solves a problem rather than creating one. The Vaelshi will always want to analyze before acting. Give them the data they need, but set the timeline so their analysis serves the mission rather than replacing a decision. The Oravani will always want the perfect shot. Create the conditions for that shot, but have a backup for when perfection is not possible. And humans? I asked. Humans, Calloway said, will always want to do the thing nobody expects. That is your greatest strength and your greatest danger. Your job as a leader is to make sure the unexpected thing is the right thing. Weeks turned into months. I trained harder than I had ever trained in my life, and for the first time, the training made sense. Every skill I had been developing in isolation at Thalorn, the body language reading, the parallel processing, the anticipatory methods, found its place in a framework that was designed for people like me. I sparred with Daniel, who fought like water, never the same style twice. I ran tactical simulations with Sophie, who thought in 3 dimensions and taught me to think in 4. I trained on the firing range with Peter, who could not match an Oravani's precision, but could shoot accurately while sprinting, while dodging, while solving a navigation problem in his head. During a final evaluation exercise, Calloway put me in a simulation against 3 opponents simultaneously: a Draelith shock trooper, a Vaelshi tactical coordinator, an Oravani marksman, all rendered by the simulation at peak performance levels. Any one of them could have taken me in their own domain. Together, by any conventional analysis, they should have been overwhelming. I did not try to beat them at what they did best. Instead, I read the Draelith's aggression pattern and baited it into charging through the Vaelshi's coordination zone, disrupting the tactical link. While the Vaelshi scrambled to recalculate, I used the confusion to close the distance on the Oravani, getting inside the effective range of precision fire, where my close quarters adaptability became the deciding factor. The whole engagement lasted 40 seconds. I changed my approach 3 times during those 40 seconds, shifting from evasion to deception to direct engagement without pause. Calloway watched from the observation deck above the simulation chamber. When I looked up, breathing hard, she nodded once. Now you know what you are, she said. But the training was also isolating. I was cut off from Thalorn, from the other human cadets, from everything I had known for 2 years. At Cairn, I was respected. I was challenged. I was learning. But I was also, in a way that crept up on me gradually, alone. I confronted Calloway about it one evening, in her quarters, which were exactly as spare and functional as every other room in the facility. Do you see me as a person or as an asset? I asked. She considered the question for a long time. Calloway never rushed an answer. Both, she said finally. That is what it means to be human in this galaxy, Marin. We do not get the luxury of being one thing, not even to ourselves. It was not a comforting answer, but it was an honest one, and I had learned to value honesty more than comfort. 3 months after my arrival at Cairn, Calloway called me into the briefing room and gave me my first operational assignment. I was going back to Thalorn. Not as a cadet, not really, although that would be my cover. I was going back as a threshold operative, embedded in the academy with a specific mission. The incursion was coming, and when it arrived, the Confederacy was going to need allies who could work with humans. My job was to identify cadets at the academy who had the potential to operate in mixed species units, cadets who thought differently from their peers, who questioned doctrine, who showed the seeds of the adaptability that Threshold valued above all else. There was a catch. My cover story was that I had been pulled for remedial training and had returned with no improvement. I had to go back to being the runt. The liability. The human who could not keep up. And this time, I had to do it on purpose. I boarded the dropship for the return journey with a knot in my stomach and a clarity in my mind that I had never felt before. I knew what I was now. I knew what I could do. And I had to hide all of it behind the same mask of quiet endurance that I had worn for 2 years, except that now the mask was a tool, not a survival mechanism. The dropship entered Thalorn's docking bay without fanfare. No alarms this time, no security lockdown, just a routine shuttle returning a remedial cadet to her unit. I walked back into the academy and felt the familiar weight of 60,000 alien eyes not seeing me. Korvath was waiting in the squad bay when I reported back. He looked at me with those flat reptilian eyes and said, "I see the remedial program did not fix you." I lowered my gaze the way I had learned to do around dominant Draelith, submissive, non-threatening, beneath notice. "No, sir," I said. "It did not." He grunted and turned away, already dismissing me from his attention. I went to my quarters, unpacked my bag, and stood at the viewport. The same viewport, the same stars, the same view of infinity that had kept me company through 2 years of being nobody. But I was not nobody anymore. I was threshold, and I had work to do. The first weeks back at Thalorn were an exercise in controlled frustration. Every instinct I had developed at Cairn screamed at me to perform, to show what I could do, to stop pretending that I was less than I was. Instead, I bit down hard on that instinct and played my role. I fumbled in sparring matches I could have won. I scored adequately on tactical exams I could have topped. I kept my head down in field exercises and let Korvath's decisions stand, even when I could see better options so clearly they might as well have been painted on the walls. And in the quiet margins of each day, I watched. I watched every cadet I interacted with, looking for the ones who did not fit their species' expected patterns, the ones who thought sideways, the ones who chafed against specialization, the ones who, like me, had been told that their instincts were wrong simply because those instincts did not match the established doctrine. I found 3. Thesic was a young Draelith, barely past his maturation cycle, assigned to a different combat squad. He was big, even by Draelith standards, but he did not fight the way his instructors wanted him to. Where other Draelith threw themselves at opponents with maximum force, Thesic held back. He watched, he waited. He used angles and timing instead of raw power, and his instructors hated him for it. I first noticed him during an inter-squad competition. His opponent, a Draelith female named Vreth who outweighed him by 30 pounds, charged with a textbook power strike. Thesic sidestepped, used her momentum against her, and put her on the ground with a technique that owed more to leverage than to strength. The instructors marked him down for using an inefficient combat methodology. I watched from the back of the observation gallery and recognized what they could not see. Thesic was a generalist, trapped in a specialist's world. Ivra was harder to find because she spent most of her time alone, which was nearly unheard of for a Vaelshi. The Vaelshi were hive-minded by nature, their neural architecture designed for constant connection with their cluster mates. A Vaelshi alone was like a single neuron removed from a brain, functional but diminished. Ivra was alone because she had been severed from her hive cluster, a neural defect, present from birth but not diagnosed until she reached Thalorn, had left her unable to maintain stable network connections with other Vaelshi. She could think independently, which was something most Vaelshi could do only with great effort and discomfort. Her instructors treated it as a disability. She was assigned modified coursework and given allowances that she clearly despised. I approached her in the library one evening, where she was studying tactical theory from a data terminal, and asked if I could sit at the adjacent desk. She looked at me with those multifaceted insectoid eyes and said, "You are the human." "Yes." "The one they say is inadequate." "That is what they say." Something shifted in her posture, a slight relaxation, the kind of body language that in a Vaelshi indicated recognition of a shared experience. "Then sit," she said. "We inadequate ones should perhaps stick together." Solène was the easiest to find and the hardest to approach. An Oravani cadet in the intelligence track, Solène had been asking questions that nobody wanted to answer. Specifically, they had been digging into the Confederacy's historical archives, pulling records from millennia-old databases, and assembling a pattern that their instructors had told them, firmly and repeatedly, did not exist. Every 11,000 years, the records went dark. Solen had not stopped asking. They had been reprimanded 3 times, placed on academic probation once, and quietly transferred from their original unit to a dead-end analysis assignment where their curiosity would presumably cause less embarrassment. I engineered a meeting by requesting access to the same archive section Solen frequented. The Oravani looked up from their terminal when I entered, their silver skin shifting toward a shade of deep blue that indicated surprise. "You are the human from the combat track," they said. "And you are the Oravani who thinks the Confederacy is hiding something." The blue deepened. "Who told you that?" "Nobody told me. I read your probation report. It is on the shared academic system. You did not seal it." Solen stared at me for a long moment. Then the blue shifted to something lighter, something that in Oravani color language meant cautious interest. "And what do you think?" they asked. "About what I found?" I sat down across from them and said carefully, "I think you are right." Over the following months, I built relationships with all 3, slowly, carefully, never pushing, never revealing more than I had to. I trained with Thesic, sparring in unofficial sessions after hours, where he could fight the way he wanted to, and I could match him without holding back too much. I studied with Ivra, trading notes on tactical theory while she taught me how Vielshi cluster thinking worked, and I showed her how human intuition could shortcut the same problems. I met Solen in the archives, helping them cross-reference historical records with pattern recognition techniques I had learned at Cairn. None of them knew about Threshold. None of them knew that I was anything other than a struggling human cadet who happened to share their sense of not belonging. And that was the part that kept me awake at night, because I genuinely liked all 3 of them, and everything I was building was founded on a lie. I told myself it was for their survival, that when the incursion came, these 3 would need to be ready, and my deception was the price of their preparation. I told myself this every night, and every night, it got a little harder to believe. Meanwhile, the galaxy beyond Thalorn's hull was getting darker. The intelligence feeds from Threshold, relayed to me through dead drop data caches hidden in the station's maintenance systems, painted a picture that grew more alarming with each update. Long-range sensor stations along the galactic rim had been going silent, one by one, like candles snuffed out by an approaching wind. A Confederate patrol fleet of 12 warships, dispatched to investigate, had sent a single burst transmission, consisting of nothing but a navigational distress code, and then gone quiet. The Confederacy's ruling council classified the data and issued a statement attributing the sensor failures to a rare subspace phenomenon. Life at Thalorn continued as if nothing was wrong. I knew better. And soon, so would everyone else. The day everything changed started like any other day at the academy. Morning drills, tactical classes, a field exercise scheduled for the afternoon on a barren moon that orbited Aethys Prime, used by the academy for live fire training scenarios. I was assigned to a mixed platoon for the exercise, 40 cadets from 6 species, with Korvath commanding one squad and a Vielshi named Jet commanding the other. I was in Korvath's squad, as usual. Thesic was in Jet's. Ivra and Solen were in the support element, running communications and sensor analysis from the base camp. The exercise objective was straightforward. 2 platoons would advance on a simulated enemy position across open terrain, using combined arms tactics to breach the defenses. Standard academy fare. I had done variations of this exercise a dozen times. We deployed to the moon's surface via shuttle, 40 cadets fanning out across a rocky landscape under a sky that was permanently dark. The moon had no atmosphere worth mentioning, and we operated in sealed environment suits with integrated comms and heads-up displays. The terrain was cratered and uneven, with ridgelines and gullies that provided natural cover. 20 minutes into the advance, Ivra's voice came over the command channel. She sounded different. The careful detachment that she maintained in professional settings was gone, replaced by something raw. "Contact," she said. "Multiple contacts. Bearing 270. They are not part of the exercise." The channel erupted with crosstalk. Korvath barked orders for silence. Jet's Vielshi cluster link hummed with rapid-fire data exchange. I dropped behind a ridge and pulled up my suit's sensor overlay. Ivra was right. They were not part of the exercise. The contacts were moving across the moon's surface from the west, advancing in a pattern that was not random, but also did not match any tactical doctrine I had ever studied. There were dozens of them, maybe more. My sensors could not get a clean count because the contacts kept shifting, splitting, merging, as if they were not discrete entities but components of something larger. The first visual came from a Drelith scout on the western flank. His helmet camera feed went out to the entire platoon, and for 3 seconds, nobody breathed. The things were biomechanical. That was the only word that fit. They moved on limbs that were part organic and part something else, something that gleamed like dark metal under the starlight. They had no faces, no eyes, no features that suggested a species or a civilization. They were shapes in motion, constantly shifting, adapting their forms to the terrain as they advanced. They were also fast. The Drelith scout opened fire on instinct, his plasma rifle sending bright blue bolts into the nearest contact. The shots hit. The contact staggered. Then it reformed around the damage and kept coming. The scout's feed cut out. What followed was the most terrifying 12 minutes of my life. The Academy's response was immediate and, by every standard of Confederate military doctrine, correct. The Drelith squads formed a defensive line and poured concentrated fire into the advancing contacts. The Veilshi tactical clusters began coordinating a response pattern, analyzing the contact's movement, and distributing targeting data across the platoon. The Oravani snipers took up elevated positions and began precision strikes on what appeared to be vulnerable points in the contact structures. None of it worked. The Drelith fire discipline was flawless. Their weapons struck with devastating force. The contacts absorbed the damage and kept coming. The Veilshi analysis was brilliant, identifying patterns in the contact's movement and predicting their advance routes with remarkable accuracy. But the contacts changed their patterns faster than the Veilshi consensus could update. The Oravani snipers hit their targets with perfect precision, scoring clean strikes on the contact's structural nodes. The nodes regenerated in seconds. Specialists fighting a threat that adapted to specialization. It was exactly what Calloway had warned me about. I dropped my mask. There was no decision point, no dramatic moment of choice. 1 second I was Cadet Voss, crouching behind a ridge and following orders. The next second, I was someone else entirely, and my voice was on the command channel, and it was calm and clear, and carrying an authority that nobody in that platoon had ever heard from a human. All units, this is Voss. Drelith squads, fall back to the secondary ridge and establish a defensive anchor. Do not advance. Repeat, do not advance. Hold position and draw their attention. Veilshi elements, stop trying to pattern match. These things adapt faster than consensus. Switch to predictive deviation analysis. Look for what they have not done yet, not what they are doing now. Oravani snipers, stop targeting structural nodes. They regenerate. Look for energy concentration points. They have to power the regeneration from somewhere. For a heartbeat, nobody responded. A human was giving orders to a mixed species platoon. A cadet, and not even a respected one, was overriding 2 squad leaders. Then Thesik's voice came over the channel, steady and sure. Drelith Squad 2, falling back to secondary ridge. Voss, I have your flank. Then Ivra, switching to predictive deviation. Voss, I need 15 seconds. Then Solen, scanning for energy concentrations. I see something. Voss, there are nodes deeper in their structure, not the external ones. Internal, 3 per contact. The platoon shifted, not smoothly, not cleanly, but it shifted. Some of the Drelith hesitated, looking to Korvath, who was staring at me with an expression I could not read behind his helmet visor. But when Thesik moved, others followed, because Drelith respected action more than rank. I positioned the Drelith defensive line where their strength mattered most, between the contacts and the cadets who could not take a direct hit. I used Ivra's independent thinking to run real-time analysis on the contact's adaptation cycle, and she found something the Veilshi clusters had missed. The contacts did not adapt instantly. There was a lag, barely 2 seconds, between encountering a new threat type and reconfiguring to counter it. 2 seconds. That was enough. I called out a rotation. Drelith pressure to force the contacts to configure for heavy assault. Then Oravani precision strikes on the internal energy nodes that Solen had identified, hitting during the 2-second window before the contacts could reconfigure for precision defense. Then, when the contacts tried to adapt to the alternating pattern, I sent Thesik's squad on a flanking run that hit them from an angle they had not yet configured for. 3 different threat types, Cycled every 2 seconds, from 3 different directions. No specialist approach. No doctrine. Just constant, rolling adaptation. The kind of fighting that no single species would ever think to do, because no single species needed to. I saw it working. The contacts stumbled, caught between configurations, unable to adapt fast enough to a threat that kept changing what kind of threat it was. Then one of them got through. It came from my blind side, moving low and fast across the broken ground. I saw it too late to dodge, and not late enough to do the thing that every survival instinct told me not to do. I let it hit me. The impact was enormous. My suit's armor absorbed most of it, but the force drove me back 3 meters and slammed me against a boulder. Warning lights flooded my heads-up display. My left arm went numb from shoulder to fingertips. But I had 3 seconds of contact. 3 seconds with the thing pressed against me, its biomechanical surface shifting and reforming against my suit's sensors. And in those 3 seconds, my suit recorded everything: the internal structure, the energy flow patterns, the regeneration architecture. I pushed away from it, rolled to my feet, and transmitted the data to every unit in the platoon. "There," I said, highlighting the structural weakness my sensors had found. "The central power conduit. It does not regenerate. Hit that, and they stop." Solen confirmed it in seconds. The Oravani adjusted their targeting. The first clean hit on a central power conduit dropped a contact instantly, and it did not get back up. After that, it was over quickly. Not easily, not without cost, but quickly. The cadets adapted to the new targeting data. The contacts, unable to reconfigure against a strategy that exploited their one true weakness, fell back and eventually withdrew. When the extraction shuttles arrived 20 minutes later, I was standing in the middle of 15 cadets from 5 different species. My left arm was hanging at my side, my suit was scorched and dented, and I was giving calm instructions in 3 different languages through a comms channel that had somehow, without anyone deciding it, become mine. Korvath stood at the edge of the group. His helmet was off, and his reptilian face was turned toward me. I had spent 2 years learning to read Draelith expressions, and what I saw on his face was something I had never seen directed at me before. He was looking at me the way a Draelith looks at a warrior. Back on the station, the medical bay was crowded with cadets being treated for injuries. My arm turned out to be badly bruised but not broken, which the Oravani medic who examined me described as statistically remarkable given the force of the impact. I sat on a treatment table while the medic worked, and I thought about what I had done. I had dropped my cover. I had revealed capabilities that 2 years of careful pretending had kept hidden. I had given orders to alien soldiers and they had followed me. There was no going back to being the runt. My comm pad buzzed. A secure channel, encrypted with threshold protocols. 2 words on the screen. "It is time." I closed my eyes for a moment, then I opened them and got off the table. The academy was not the same place I had returned to 6 months ago. The attack on the moon had shattered something fundamental in Thalorn's carefully maintained order. Cadets who had trained their entire lives within the framework of Confederate doctrine had just watched that doctrine fail. Instructors who had taught specialization as an unquestionable truth were struggling to explain why 60 trained specialists had been unable to stop a threat that 1 human cadet and an improvised mixed-species response had turned back. The rumors spread faster than the official reports. By the time the Confederacy's ruling council issued a formal galactic threat declaration, acknowledging for the first time that the anomalies at the galactic rim represented a genuine and unprecedented danger, the cadets of Thalorn already knew. Something was coming. Something that did not care how strong you were, how smart you were, or how precise you were. Something that adapted to every strength and turned it into a weakness. I was summoned to the Academy Commandant's chambers 3 days after the attack, not by Calloway, not by Threshold, but by the Veilshi Grand Tactician personally. When I arrived at the heavy doors that led to the Commandant's private briefing room, I found Thesic, Ivra, and Solen already waiting in the corridor. "They called you too?" Thesic asked. I nodded. "All of us," Ivra said. "Interesting." The doors opened, and we entered. The Commandant stood behind a curved desk that was designed for a Veilshi body, all sharp angles and raised surfaces that accommodated their insectoid anatomy. 4 compound eyes turned toward me as I entered, and for the first time in my experience, Those eyes held something other than casual dismissal. "Cadet Voss," the commandant said, "I have reviewed the engagement data from the lunar surface. I have reviewed it 7 times. Each review raises the same question, and I find that I cannot answer it without your help." "What question, Commandant? How did you know what to do?" I looked at Thesic, who gave me a barely perceptible nod. I looked at Ivra, whose compound eyes reflected the room's light in a pattern that I had learned to read as trust. I looked at Solène, whose silver skin was steady and calm. I thought about lying, about maintaining my cover, about feeding the Commandant a story about instinct and luck, and the desperate improvisation of a frightened cadet. Calloway's voice in my memory said it is time, and I understood what she meant. I knew what to do, because I was trained for it, I said. Not here, not by the Academy. By a program that identified the threat you are now facing, and has been preparing for it while the Confederacy chose not to look. The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel. I did not tell the Commandant about Threshold, not the name, not the organization, not the scope, but I told the operational truth. I told the Commandant that the attack on the moon was not an isolated event, that the constructs were the advance wave of a cyclical incursion that occurred every 11,000 years, and that the evidence for this was buried in the Confederacy's own historical archives. Solène stepped forward and confirmed it. They had been studying the pattern for over a year. They had the data. They had the timeline. They had been told to stop looking, and they had not stopped. The Commandant was silent for a very long time. Veilshi process information differently than humans. Where a human might pace or frown or argue, a Veilshi stands perfectly still and lets their neural architecture work. Finally, the Commandant spoke. The Confederate High Council has convened an emergency session to address the threat declaration. They have requested that this academy provide a tactical assessment of the lunar engagement. The Commandant's eyes fixed on me. I am going to recommend that you deliver that assessment personally, Cadet Voss. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Commandant, with respect, the Council will not listen to a human cadet. No, the Commandant agreed. They will not want to. That is precisely why it must be you. The Confederate High Council chambers on Ethos Prime were the most imposing space I had ever entered. The room was circular, tiered like an amphitheater, with seating sections designed for dozens of different species. Each section was marked with the emblem of a member world, and delegates filled every seat. Dralith war marshals in ceremonial armor, Veilshi cluster leaders linked in shimmering neural networks, Oravani elders whose silver skin rippled with colors I did not have names for, and dozens of others, species I had studied but never met, all of them looking down at the central platform where I stood, alone, in a borrowed uniform that still bore the rank insignia of a cadet. I was 22 years old. I was human. I was standing in front of the assembled leadership of a galactic civilization that had existed for 11,000 years, and I was about to tell them that everything they believed about their own safety was wrong. The Dralith war marshal spoke first. A massive figure in gold-chased armor, she looked at me the way Korvath had looked at me on my first day at Thalorn, with the absolute certainty that I did not belong. The Council recognizes the Academy's tactical representative, she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. State your assessment. I took a breath. Then I began. I walked them through the engagement on the moon, using holographic reconstructions that Solène and Ivra had helped me prepare. I showed them how the constructs had adapted to each specialized response, how the Dralith firepower had been absorbed, how the Veilshi analysis had been outpaced, how the Oravani precision had been neutralized by regeneration. Then I showed them the part that nobody wanted to see. The pattern. 11,000 years of cyclical incursion, documented in the Confederacy's own fragmented records. The sensor blackouts at the rim, the silent patrol fleet, the advanced constructs on the moon. These are not random attacks, I said. They are scouts. The leading edge of something much larger, and the military doctrine that this Confederacy has relied on for its entire existence, a doctrine built on specialization, on each species perfecting its singular strength, is exactly the wrong response. These constructs are designed to defeat specialists. They adapt to any single threat. The only effective counter is what we demonstrated on that moon. Integrated response. Mixed species units operating across doctrinal lines, cycling through multiple threat profiles faster than the constructs can adapt. The chamber erupted. The Draelith War Marshal was on her feet, her armored fist striking the podium in front of her. This is arrogance beyond measure. A child from a species that has been in space for barely a decade presumes to lecture civilizations that were building warships before her kind learned to forge metal. A Vyelshi delegate clicked rapid objections, arguing that the data was insufficient and the historical pattern was coincidental. An Oravani elder suggested, in the gentlest possible terms, that perhaps the stress of the engagement had affected my judgment. I stood in the center of it all and waited for the storm to pass. Calloway had trained me for this too. Not the specific scenario, but the principle. When you are the smallest voice in the room, do not try to shout louder than everyone else. Wait. Let them exhaust themselves, then speak into the silence. The silence came. It always does. You are right, I said, and the chamber went completely still, because those were not the words anyone expected. You are right that we are young. You are right that we have been in space for less than a blink of your history. You are right that by any measure of individual capability, humans are outmatched by nearly every species in this chamber. I looked up at the tiered seating, turning slowly to address every section. But maybe that is exactly why we can see what you cannot. You have had so long to become perfect at what you are, that you have forgotten how to become something else. Every species here has spent millennia refining a single strength until it defines you. The Draelith are power, the Vyelshi are intelligence, the Oravani are precision, and you are magnificent at these things. Truly, I have spent 2 years training alongside your best, and I have never once doubted that. I paused. But the thing that is coming does not care about your individual magnificence. It adapts to magnificence. It eats specialization for fuel, and when it arrives, the only thing that will stop it is something none of you have ever tried. Not the best of one thing, but all of your strengths, woven together, led by people who can think across every boundary that separates you. I took one more breath. We have never had the luxury of being the best at any one thing. Adaptation is not our strategy. It is our identity. It is the only reason we survived long enough to reach the stars. And right now, it is the only thing that is going to keep this galaxy alive. The silence held for 3 heartbeats. 4, 5. Then the Vyelshi commandant of Thalorn Academy rose from the observer's gallery. All 4 compound eyes were fixed on me, and the commandant spoke in a voice that carried through the chamber with the weight of a century of service. I support this assessment. I have reviewed the engagement data extensively, and Cadet Voss's analysis is consistent with what I observed. The constructs defeated our doctrines. Her approach defeated the constructs. A movement in the Draelith section. Thesic, who had been admitted to the gallery as a witness to the engagement, stood. Among the Draelith, a junior warrior standing in the presence of the War Marshal was an act of extraordinary boldness. Every Draelith eye in the chamber turned to him. I was on that moon, Thesic said. I followed her orders. We all did. Not because she outranked us, because she was the only one with a plan that worked. Ivor stood next, a lone Vyelshi, severed from her cluster, speaking with a single voice, in a chamber built for collective consensus. I ran the tactical analysis that identified the construct's adaptation lag, she said. I could not have found it using Vyelshi cluster methodology. Cadet Voss asked me to think independently, and the independent thought is what saved us. Solen rose last, their silver skin calm and steady. I have the historical data. 11,000 years of evidence. I will share it with any delegation that wishes to review it. The pattern is real. The incursion is real. And if we do not change how we fight, we will not survive it. One by one, other cadets stood. Cadets who had been on the moon. Cadets who had followed my orders and were alive because of it. Draelith, Vyelshi, Oravani. Others whose species I barely knew. I looked up at the observer's gallery. At the very back, in the shadows, and I saw a figure standing motionless. Silver hair, dark clothing, a face that gave nothing away. Eleanor Calloway was watching, and on her face, just for a moment, before the shadows swallowed it, was something that I had never seen there before. The council debated for 6 more hours. Factions formed and dissolved. Arguments raged. Old grievances between species flared and were quelled. But the momentum had shifted, and by the time the session closed, the council had authorized something that had never existed in the Confederacy's 11,000-year history. A joint task force. Mixed species units operating under an experimental integrated doctrine, led by commanders trained in cross-doctrinal methodology, led by humans. My commission came through the next morning. It was not a Confederate rank, and not a human military rank. It was something new, created for a purpose that had never existed before. Cross-species operational commander, the first of its kind. The orders were simple in language and staggering in scope. Form a unit, train it, prepare it for a threat that nobody fully understood. Do it fast, because the rim was getting darker every day. My unit came together in the following weeks. Thesic was the first to volunteer, followed by Ivra and Solène, then others, Dryolith warriors who had seen the moon and understood that brute force alone would not save them. Vaelshi tacticians who had watched their cluster consensus fail and were willing to try something new. Or Ivani marksmen who wanted to be part of a strategy, not just a firing solution, and species I had never worked with before, each bringing strengths I had to learn to integrate. 3 threshold operatives arrived on another black dropship: Daniel, Kate, and Sophie, the teammates I had trained with at Cairn. They folded into the unit without ceremony, filling gaps, teaching techniques, adapting to alien colleagues with the same quiet competence they brought to everything. We trained together in a repurposed section of Thalorn that the Commandant had cleared for our use. It was rough. It was messy. Cross-species operations meant navigating physical differences, communication barriers, tactical philosophies that had evolved separately for millennia, and egos that did not bend easily. There were arguments. There were failures. There were days when the whole enterprise felt like it would collapse under the weight of its own improbability. But there were also moments. A Drelith warrior and a Vaelshi tactician solving a problem together that neither could have solved alone. An Oravani sniper adjusting their approach based on feedback from a human spotter and landing a shot that rewrote what they thought was possible. Thesic and Daniel sparring, Drelith power against human adaptability, and both of them grinning when the match ended in a draw. These were the moments I held on to. These were the moments that told me we were building something real. The intelligence from Threshold continued to arrive through secure channels. The incursion was accelerating. The rim sensor blackout had spread across an arc of 40 degrees. 2 more patrol fleets had gone silent. The constructs on the moon had been scouts, and the main force was moving inward. The Confederacy was mobilizing. The largest fleet in recorded history was being assembled, a combined force of every member species, marshaled under emergency protocols that had not been activated in living memory. Drelith dreadnoughts, Vaelshi carrier mines, Oravani precision frigates, and nestled among them, small and dark and running without transponder lights, a squadron of human dropships. On the last night before deployment, I stood on the observation deck of Thalorn Academy and looked out at the fleet. Hundreds of ships, hanging in formation around Ethos Prime, their hulls catching the light of the system's star. It was the most beautiful and the most frightening thing I had ever seen. Thesic found me there. He stood beside me, his massive frame dwarfing mine, and looked out at the same view. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Are you?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "My people do not usually admit that." "Mine do," I said. "We just do it anyway." He made a sound that I had learned was Drelith laughter, low and rumbling like distant thunder. "That," he said, "is why I follow you." The fleet departed at dawn. My unit was aboard a Confederate cruiser that had been modified to accommodate mixed species operations, a ship designed for specialists being repurposed, like everything else, for something new. I stood on the bridge as we entered FTL, watching the stars stretch and blur around us. My unit was scattered through the ship, preparing in their own ways. Thesic was in the armory, checking weapons with a focus that bordered on meditation. Ivra was in the tactical center, running deviation analyses on every piece of incursion data we had. Solène was in the sensor bay, calibrating detection equipment for energy signatures that matched the construct's power conduits. Daniel, Kate, and Sophie were moving through the crew sections, quietly teaching human adaptation techniques to alien soldiers who were learning, for the first time in their lives, to think outside their specialization. My compad held a single message from Callaway, sent just before we departed. It was not an order. It was not a briefing. It was 3 words. Bring them home. We dropped out of FTL at the edge of known space, and the tactical display lit up like a fire. The rim was alive with incursion signatures, thousands of them, pouring through a breach in normal space that stretched across a region larger than most star systems. The constructs were not just scouts anymore. They were a wave, a tide, a force that moved with terrible purpose toward the heart of the galaxy. The fleet spread into formation around us. I could see the tactical feeds from every ship, every unit, every species. The Dralith dreadnoughts were powering their main batteries. The Valshi carrier mines were spinning up their fighter complements. The Oravani frigates were locking their precision arrays onto the advancing wall of contacts. And on every ship, in every unit, mixed alongside the specialists, were the first graduates of integrated doctrine, small teams, embedded throughout the fleet, trained to adapt, to cycle, to think across boundaries. Seeds planted in the weeks since the Council's decision, not enough to change the entire fleet's methodology overnight, but enough to make a difference. I opened a channel, every species, every ship, every soul in the fleet. My voice carried across the void, translated into 37 languages by systems that had been designed to keep species apart and were now, for the first time, being used to bring them together. This is Commander Voss. All units, all species, form up on me. A pause, a breath, the weight of 11,000 years of history pressing down on a single moment. We adapt together, I said, or we fall apart. The fleet moved as one. The incursion met us at the edge of the dark, and in the light of 1,000 weapons firing in concert, in the chaos of a battle that would be remembered for as long as civilization endured, I felt something that I had not felt since my first day at Thalorn Academy. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest, just the one who refused to stop. The one who stood at the intersection of every strength this galaxy had and held them together through sheer, stubborn, impossibly human will. The galaxy had faced this darkness before, and every time, it had faced it divided. Species fighting alone, each magnificent in isolation, each falling separately. Not this time. This time, the darkness met something it had never encountered in 11,000 years of cyclical dominance. Not a specialist, not a single perfected weapon. It met a human, standing in the middle of an alliance that should have been impossible, leading a force that fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. And for the first time in 11,000 years, the darkness did not win.